So my name is Michelle Jewsbury, and I'm a fun-loving, awesome, I love awesome hikes and outdoors, and I love my family, very, very close to them. And I grew up in a household where, there was love around all the time. And oftentimes people don't associate that with being able to get involved in a domestic violence relationship. So when I was roughly, 28, I ended up meeting this man, his name is Paul, that I fell head over heels for. And lo and behold, it was very, very abusive, and I kept the abuse from my parents and from my mom and my dad and my brother and every family member. I kept it from my friends. I didn't want to talk about what was happening because I didn't really acknowledge what I was going through. And oftentimes when people go through abusive situations, they keep it to themselves and they stay silent. So 4 years later, and we'll talk about some of the abuse, I'm sure, but 4 years later when I finally escaped that relationship, I sat down at my computer and I just looked at the black screen and I thought I should just document some of the things that happened to me. And because I did that, I then realized how bad it was and knew that I had to do something about it.
For the women and men out there who are currently experiencing a situation very similar to what you experienced, why the silence? What was it about you personally that kept you from speaking out about the abuse inside your relationship?
Well, the main thing is I didn't understand what I was going through. I didn't acknowledge that it was domestic violence. I didn't realize how severe it was. Because when you're living in a certain situation, that is your life. So you don't relate it to anybody else. You just live your life. And if your life has abuse in it, then you just work through that. And you don't acknowledge how bad it is. Because if you sit down and really think about, wow, my life is crappy right now, then you go through a depression. And then you can't wake up, and then things get worse if you're in an abusive relationship, because then your partner, your narcissistic abuser, will continue to abuse and manipulate and psychologically, sexually, and emotionally violate you on all kinds of levels. So to answer your question, Minji, I didn't acknowledge what I was going through, so then I kept it to myself, thinking that he would change, because that's what he said, because the cycle of domestic violence, the last stage, is the apology stage, the I love yous, and I promise I'm never going to hurt you again. So then I believed him. So why would I tell somebody about someone else's faults when I truly believed that that person would change, and then we would have that fairy tale romance that I was looking for?
It's always that hook, right? Like that idealized, like I could rescue, or I could be the inspiration for that person to transform if I only did X, Y, Z, if I only became this perfect, I imagine like Belle from Beauty and the Beast, like the woman to be the savior, if you will, to transform the beast into the prince. Was this the first relationship that you found yourself wanting to, like I would say, inspire someone to turn from like violent, hate, self-loathing, hateful, whatever that person was experiencing, into something like transformative? Was that the first relationship, or was there more?
I'm going to back up a little bit on that question. So the question that you're asking is, was this the first relationship where I was involved with a man, a narcissistic abuser, who I thought that I could fix and help, right?
Yeah.
So the answer is yes. However, I didn't intentionally think that I could fix him, right? So what happens in abusive relationships is that your narcissistic abuser, Paul in my case, will tell me things, and he told me lots of things about his childhood, about his struggles, about things that he had gone through. So then I had sympathy for him. So I started to be empathetic towards the way he was, because he had experienced so much. So it was really interesting because I understood why he acted the way he did. But because I understood it, it doesn't make it right. So I have been in other relationships where I see their pain and their struggle and I think I can help them. But I have never been in a relationship where it was such severe psychological, sexual, and physical abuse.
Now, were there moments, because it was a 4-year relationship, right? Yeah. So this is an evolution. This is like not just something that happened a few months, but you really stuck it through with this man. My understanding when it comes to personally, being in a long-term relationship is that you have this connection, you have this, like, I don't know, almost like he's part of your body, like he's part of your, like, the souls enmesh in that. What was it about Paul that made it distinctive from other relationships? What was it about him that really drew you close to where you're 100% committed at that time?
He made me feel a way that I have never felt before. Paul swooned me. He swept me off of my feet. Now, in the beginning of my book, I talk about this, and we'll talk about this a little later. I wanted a fairy tale romance so badly. And when I met Paul, and when we started dating, he pursued me, sent me flowers, sent me texts of how beautiful I was, how talented I was, how amazing I was. But those texts and those words of affirmation turned ugly very, very quickly. And because he had already captured my heart, like early on in the relationship, when those praises started turning into negativity, then I brushed it off as he was having a hard day, that he was triggered by something, that he's super busy. He was a very, very successful entrepreneur. And I loved that he was so successful, that he worked so hard. I looked up to him on many, many levels. So, there were times where we would drive up and down the 101 freeway and laugh and listen to Georgia, Florida Line. I remember he used to love that song. And it was amazing. And he was one of the best men I have ever dated in my whole life. But he was also the worst relationship I've ever had as well. So it was this yin and yang of him being this person that on the outside was absolutely wonderful, successful, donated some of his time, loved, liked to give things away, but then behind closed doors he was a monster. And it was really hard to disconnect from the good when the bad happened.
Yeah, that's actually really tough, because not to dismiss, it's interesting you call it yin and yang, because that's exactly what it is. I think the tough part in any kind of relationship that has yin and yang is that you don't know whether you're dating the monster that has the good face or the good boy that's trapped by the monster. If you know what I mean.
I do.
You don't know which one's the real person, because it could be, even now we could put that out there in the universe. It could be both, right? He could technically be a good man that's just trapped under a lot of unhealed, repressed, psychologically torn things that had he gone through the necessary steps, you know, he could have perhaps transitioned out of that, but he didn't during the time that you were dating him, right?
Yeah, so hurt people hurt people. That's the one thing that I have learned. So because I understood why he was doing it, right? He was very hurt. There was a lot of unresolved issues from his childhood to his adolescence, family issues that he never dealt with. And that's typical with abusers. There's always some underlying cause as to why they act out. So when he started acting out, then I dismissed it, right? And even when I was beat so severely that I should have died, there was 2 times in particular that I was beat for over 4 hours, and I should have died. Strangulation, there was one point where he put himself inside of me, and I was screaming, and you know, it's rape. And there were other times where, you know, his favorite tactic was to strangle me with his left hand and to put his fingers of his right hand in my mouth, under my tongue, and press so hard that it would draw blood. However, like the cycle suggests, the reason I didn't leave is because the next morning, on both occasions, he looked at me. The first time he cried and bawled and begged me to forgive him. So I did, you know, and that's what typically happens. And oftentimes those arguments, those fights, those severe beatings last longer than they should, and oftentimes end up in death. Because, you know, when you strangle somebody for, you know, over and over and over again, you being the abuser, you have that person's life in your hands. It was hard. And, you know, because he was hurting, I had suggested therapy. He started going to therapy, and that was a thing, another reason why I stayed, because he was showing some improvement here or there, or he was showing an effort until he wasn't, you know. And still to this day, one of my dreams is that he will understand what it is that he's gone through, that he will take responsibility for his actions, that he will take an effort to help himself, and us standing on stage together talking about our story. Because although I never want to get back together with that man because he hurt me so bad, I still have sympathy for him, and I still hope the best for him. And I really, really pray that he does get better. And if he does get better, then the Jekyll and Hyde won't be a yin and yang anymore. It will just be a great man who can provide an awesome life for a family.
Yeah.
And, you know, I hope one day that happens. My therapist, he says, well, that's a nice dream. I don't know if that's really going to happen or not, but it's a great dream. So
yeah, it's always good to hope, honestly.
Yeah.
It always is good. It's good to hope. Yeah, I hear that even in the times that you were in the thick of the abuse, you still held on to a lot of hope for a higher version of himself, even when in reality he was acting out the lowest version of himself. What do you think is, just in general, like, you know, because you mentioned how hurt people, and it's so pervasive in the world right now. It's a generational cycle. It's also happening in the schools, in workplaces, in the quiet corners of the household. What do you think, if you had to put yourself in the perpetrator's point of view for just a second, because this is something that I was inspired by Dr. Jordan Peterson talking about, putting yourself in the shoes of a perpetrator. What do you think is the reason why people that have been hurt when they were younger grow up to hurt people? What do you think is their payoff for doing that?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say a payoff. I would say it alleviates what they've gone through. So typically abusers abuse because of unresolved issues. Now there's something called adverse childhood experiences, where if you go through something as a child, a traumatic experience, or even as a young adult, if those are unresolved, if you don't speak up about them, if you don't do writing therapy, movement therapy, some type of arts, things like that, get it out. If you don't speak up, then it stays within your body. And in the end, it causes either physical and or emotional ailments. Well, the reason why abusers abuse is because there are emotional ailments that they're still dealing with. So then they're lashing out towards people. And that could be when they get drunk, because that will just enhance, right, what they're feeling inside, and then they're not inhibited anymore by their own consciousness. Being, a drug addict is the same thing. When you smoke that weed, or when you take that line or inject that needle, you feel better, right, because you are hiding your true feelings, but then yet you feel more able to lash out and share what it is that you want to share, because you don't have your consciousness holding that back, subduing that. So if I were to put myself in the shoes of an abuser, and especially somebody who has gone through a lot of crap, right, growing up or in their adolescence, if they've witnessed a lot of abuse, for example, they have to go get that out of them. Whether, like I said, writing, in-person therapy, whatever that is. Our team teaches a lot of writing. I do a lot of coaching right now because of what I've experienced. That has to come out of you, because if it doesn't, then you have a higher probability to hurt the people around you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I see a distinction here. Because you mentioned earlier, before the start of this interview, that you did a one-person show where you basically embodied and acted out the trauma, right? Yeah. Whereas other people might not have done that, and other people, like Paul, for example, repressed it, pretended it didn't exist, and just leveraged a resume and like a lot of the, material things around them to kind of show people and themselves that everything's fine. But then in the secret corners, when it's all quiet and no one's looking, then he acts it out in negative ways, right, on the person that loves him the most and tolerates him the most. Whereas you, on the other hand, acted it out on stage before a bunch of people, most of them you probably don't know intimately, yet you still were able to embody that trauma and be able to recreate it. Tell me the distinction of that for you personally, first as someone who's personally went through that, meaning put together the play, acted out the play in front of people. What was that like for you personally? And then take us back to a point of more of like a professional, distanced, way of comparing the two. Like, what do you think is the distinction between someone acting it out in drama, in creative arts, and someone that doesn't? What is that like? So those are two questions.
Yeah, they are two, and loaded questions.
Yeah.
So I didn't even think that I was going to write a play. So when I started documenting what happened to me after I had left my abuser, it honestly came out in book format. And I just started writing and writing and writing. And I was going to a group called Guided Autobiography. It's like a Bible study with wine. So a bunch of girls would get together and we would drink wine and tell stories about what happened to us and write things. One of my friends in that Guided Autobiography group said, hey, you should go visit Jessica Lynn Johnson, who is probably, arguably, the best solo artist director in Los Angeles. And I'm like, all right, we'll see. So I went to her free class, which she used to offer Saturday mornings. I don't know what day she offers it now. And I sat there with my arms crossed because I didn't want to be there. I was like, what the heck am I doing here? But then I started understanding that, wow, this is a story. I could do this. So she helped me craft a one-woman show called But I Love Him. And I performed it, debuted it in February 2016, and again later that year in the Hollywood Fringe Festival. While I was rehearsing every single day, beating myself up every single day, I would talk to her and, talk to some of my friends about it, and everybody used to say, oh, it's so therapeutic. And I used to want to punch them in their face because I didn't want to hear that it was therapeutic, because I wasn't doing it to heal. I was doing it to showcase what it was to be in an abusive relationship. But looking back on that now, it was extremely therapeutic because I was able to get out all of the stuff that was in my head. Playing roughly 13 characters, I think I played a little more than that. One of them being Paul, where I literally beat myself up on stage, threw myself against walls, spit on myself, cussed at myself, used the same language and same actions as Paul did on me in real life. I was able to relive what I went through, and I believe that you need to relive it, like I said, through some type of therapeutic way, and it's painful, extremely painful, and that's why I didn't fess up to the fact that it was therapeutic.
In some ways, it's like when you're caught in that trap trauma in your body, I hear from you that it's necessary to get it out, whether on paper or in play, in production, some kind of creative means to just get it out and to relive it in some way so you could see it. Now, let's juxtapose that of what the choices you've made, right, to share it with a group of intimate strangers in a girls group, just talking about it, writing about it, and then later to put it into production. Now let's contrast that with Paul.
Okay.
So from your understanding, did he have any of the tools that you had in terms of choices, not in terms of like what's available, because obviously it's available because you've done it, but did he go through any of that for himself?
He was in denial. And oftentimes people live in that denial. And if you live in that denial, then you can't get it out, because then you don't acknowledge, realize, accept, and recognize that you've gone through that trauma. So his mom used to tell me that she was beat up by his stepfather. And when I brought that up to Paul, he said that never happened, she's a liar. But he was in the next room when that was happening to her. So he heard that happening, but he has repressed it. So he's in denial.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, he did have the choice to speak up about it. He did have the opportunity to get it out, but you can't get out what you don't believe.
I might even add, and this might be a little bit abrasive, but I would almost say he did relive it through you. Like even though he didn't act it out in play, he did relive it by projecting it onto the person that loves him the most, that he could trust the most. And so
there was one time where he was beating me up and he called me by his mother's name. So I guess he was reliving it, but he was acting it out in a negative way. So the association in his head was that he wanted to hurt his mom because of what she did to him. Although I don't know really what exactly happened or what she really did to him, right? But I know that time when he called me by his mom's name while he was beating me up, I knew there was something in his mind that wasn't right. And he was very, very angry. And when you react to situations that may not be true, It may be your story that you've created about a particular event. And when you react in a negative way and you hurt the people around you, that's not the reliving that I'm talking about, right? Mm-hmm. The reliving is your personal experience in a specific situation where you relive what happened to you through some type of external means, writing, etc., what it is. But it doesn't mean that you use your experience to then hurt other people.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And this is, I feel like there is a critical learning piece to this, in that it is necessary to relive, but how you do it makes a world of a difference.
Yes.
A world of a difference. It's the difference between someone actually murdering someone versus someone putting together a film, maybe like a murder case film, as a director, and scripting it, doing the production, having actors, putting together the production, and making a film about it. Like, it's a world of a difference.
Well, yeah, because you're not hurting people, right? So the difference is that when you relive your experiences, you do it personally. You don't hurt the people around you. You do it through storytelling. That's what you just brought up. You know, you do it through acting out or therapy, something like that. But you don't relive the experience in real life and reenact what happened to you. That's not what we're talking about.
And yet, in reality, there's so many people that don't understand that, first, there is trauma. It exists. No matter what you want to, if you want to deny it or if you want to acknowledge it, it's there no matter what, right? It's like, I can't think of the elephant in the room. There's a big elephant in the room, and you could either acknowledge there's an elephant in the room, or you can just pretend it's not there even though it's there. Now, I hear that the first thing is acknowledging it. And I feel like a lot of people who don't understand generational trauma and abuse, I think a lot of people mistaken that if they acknowledge it, then everything will fall apart. Then they must either cut that person out of their lives, or they need to like do something dramatic, and they don't want to make drastic changes. So I also hear from you that, you know, you instead of you going and perpetuating the abuse onto someone else in your intimate life, you've chosen a different direction.
Yes.
And how has that helped you in terms of writing the book, starting your own nonprofit 501c3 to help other people, speaking out both publicly and also among friends, and then also, you know, going and acting out in play the trauma? How has that helped you personally in your relationship to yourself and also to the people around you in terms of intimate relationships?
So when I started documenting things that happened, and when I started getting out what I went through, I developed a process. And this was my personal process that I now share, so I will go ahead and, of course, give that process out. But the first step we talked about is recognizing. You have to recognize, accept, realize that which you've been through. But then you've got to be able to change your thoughts, your feelings, your words, and your actions surrounding that obstacle or trauma. So it's a 5-step process in order to help you recover from obstacles and trauma. And you can get that 5-step process if you text overcoming to 26786. Our team has put that together in a PDF file for you. But for me personally, when I started to change my association around it, when I started to change the way I feel about those specific events, and when I started to forgive, and that's a hard one, because how can you forgive a father who's been molesting you for 10 years? You know, it's hard. That wasn't my personal experience, but I have clients who tell me that, and it's hard to let that go. And forgiveness for me, I remember walking and going hiking. I used to go hiking a lot, and I used to yell at God, why is Paul like this? God, why don't you change him? And I used to hear that verse, how many times do you forgive? 7 times? No, 7 times, 70 times, right? So I used to think that forgiveness meant that I had to stay with Paul. But that's not what forgiveness means. Forgiveness means that you let it go for your soul. You accept it, realize it, okay? And then you forgive that person because hurt people. They didn't understand the implications of their actions, or they didn't care. But it doesn't mean that you allow the abuse or the situation to continue, right? You step away from it, but if you forgive, then it's like a weight lifted off of you. And that's one thing that's really, really difficult for people to do, but that's something that's extremely necessary.
Yeah. Let's go through each one, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Because I feel like a lot of people could... let's start with the first one. What's the first one?
So the first step?
Yeah.
Yeah, is realization.
Okay.
So we've also put together a webinar series, and these 5 steps are in the 6-week intensive after the initial 10-week. So the reason why there's a 10-week and then an intensive 6-week is because that whole 10 weeks is to get you to realize that which you've been through. Right? So then when we get into the intensive, then we can talk about, okay, now you realize, you recognize what happened, now you accept it, you learn to forgive, and then you not just put it behind you, but you move through it.
Yeah.
Right? Either around it, over it, through it, whatever it is, but you don't have it there as a stumbling block anymore.
Yeah.
And then the second step is thoughts, right? You learn to change your thoughts surrounding that which you went through.
Okay, let's stop there real quick, because I want to take each step and actually relate it back to you.
Okay.
And your own process going through that, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So first is acknowledgement, right? How long did it take you personally to get through all the writing and all the production and all the talking? Like, what was that like for you?
You mean, when was it where I finally acknowledged, realized, and accepted what I went through?
Yeah.
Well, let's see. The last conversation I had with my abuser was December 2015. I performed my play in February 2016, but that was not when I had accepted or forgiven, right? That was just me getting it out. It took until roughly the following year for me to understand that, okay, I went through this, and it doesn't define me. And I'm not going to allow this to define me. So I'm going to do whatever I can to move through it.
I feel like these are 2 major steps, actually. They're 2 distinct steps. First is acknowledging that it happened, right? And I hear that you had to act it out, and even then it was hard to acknowledge it. It was you almost going through the motions.
Yeah, almost.
Right? To just go through the motions to, actually, but even then it feels a little foreign to you as you're acting it out. I'm just guessing.
Well, I mean, I was an actress, so I could put myself in other people's shoes and play out that of what's written on the paper, right? So, yeah, there were times where I did bawl my eyes out. And really, the last time I performed the play, which was in the Hollywood, so it was June or July of 2016. The last time I performed it was when I actually bawled my eyes out on stage. And that's when I started to, okay, accept this was what happened to me. This isn't something that I'm playing about somebody else. This is my life, right? Mm-hmm. And then that next step that you're talking about is I started to move through it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's a second major step in that, which is putting your worth aside, meaning like whatever the circumstances that happen around you does not define your worth. Like your worth, your self-esteem, your self-confidence is separate from the things that that have happened to you. Now, what was that like, and how did you come to that realization? What were some of the personal anecdotes that you've gone through that gave you this? I mean, because you know, people hear it. It could be written in a bumper sticker, but to actually believe in it, truly embody it, what were those steps for you personally?
Well, I had to change my thought process around it. You know, because the reason why you believe that you are no good, the reason why you believe that you can't achieve, why you are stuck in your circumstances, is because you think you are. And in order to change that, you have to change your thinking process. In order to change your thinking process, you have to put good information in. You got to read books. You got to change your association. Listen to the right people who are encouraging. Get yourself around people who don't treat you like your abuser did, right? So then I started to surround myself with amazing individuals that acknowledged what I went through because I had talked about it. I had shared it on stage. But then they didn't tell me, well, you deserved it. There was no victim blaming there, right? They loved me for who I was, what I had gone through. But they used to tell me all the time that that doesn't define who you are. Because my whole life I've been a strong, independent woman. My mama created this woman who would never take any shit from anybody, right? So the fact that I got myself trapped in an abusive relationship is something that most people don't understand, because you meet me and you know, I was typecast into CSI roles, you know, carrying the gun and, you know, hunting down perpetrators, which was really funny. So me getting trapped, people didn't get it. So I don't think if I ever actually put my worth as being a victim, put my worth as, you know, I caused all of this. While I was going through the relationship, I would believe him when he told me that you're worthless, you can't manage anything, you sleep all day, what the hell do you do all day long? I mean, there were so many words that he used to manipulate me. But once you escape, once I started writing, that's when I realized that his language, his words, and his actions didn't define who I was. Mm. But that's not when I started to forgive. It was later on when I actually started to forgive him, right? After I had accepted it, after I had performed that last piece of my play in June or July of 2016.
Now, before you could forgive, well, let me see if I could put this together. I hear you say that there came a moment while you were writing when you realized that those are his words, yes, not yours. Those words like, oh, you know, something about being worthless, sleeping all the time, or lazy. Those are his words that he's projected on you, and you discovered that while writing it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Were there any other incidences? Oh yeah, you told me that you were playing the roles of powerful women in your acting too, right? That also validated that for you, no?
No, sorry.
Was there anything else that validated your worth as being, okay, Michelle, this is who you are. This is not the other words, but this is who you are.
The change of my association. The hanging out with people who loved me. The going back to church and my congregation. Because once I spoke up, you know, there are two things that could happen to a victim. People could victim blame you. Well, what were you wearing? Well, you lived through it. It couldn't have been that bad because you stayed so long. But then if you get around the people who love you no matter what, who don't say those types of things, then your self-confidence goes up, right? So that's what happened for me. Is my self-confidence started to rise, and then while I was writing, I realized that they were his words. They weren't my words. They were his words.
Yeah, so I also hear that you made a very distinct choice to choose people who heal you.
Yes.
And let go of people who were
destructive.
Yeah, destructive, or who reminded you of the old abusive patterns of your ex, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, because if you stay where you were, right? If you stay hanging out with people who, blamed you for everything, then you're going to think that it was your fault the whole time. You're going to hear the words of your abuser over and over and over again and justify them because other people are justifying them. But you've got to change your environment in order to change your thinking.
I think that really is a critical piece for a lot of people that are still feeling stuck in abusive relationships, because again, I hear two parts to the first step, which is to actually acknowledge that it happened. But then a lot of people get stuck there. They okay, and then they're stuck in that cyclical loop. Like, okay, I know it's happening or it's happened. What do I do next? What do I do now? And I feel like a lot of people repeat these cycles because either they're not willing or they don't know that the next step is to detach from the language or from the people that are reinforcing those same languages.
Yeah.
And that's hard because, and it goes back to the same situation where you found yourself staying with Paul, which is, I can save you, even though you're projecting on me, but, I'm going to stick around because you're someone I need to help, instead of dealing with the fact that this is not healthy for me. This is toxic for me, and I feel like crabs in a bucket. I'm just being thrown right back into the swamp instead of getting out. And so I think that really is a critical piece. It
is, and a lot of people actually repeat, right? That's what you're talking about. A lot of women in particular will go in a relationship and they will date this man who is abusive, finally get the strength or courage to leave, but then jump right back into an abusive relationship. And the reason why they do that is because they don't take the steps necessary to heal themselves from what they went through. So that's what they're used to. Right? When you're used to a certain way, it's easier to stay. It's a lot harder to change.
And then psychologically, I also hear that they subconsciously think they deserve it.
Yes. I was saying it's like mathematics. So we'll start with addition and subtraction. Well, in order for you to learn that, you have to apply yourself. You've got to study it every day, even though you hate it, right? You've got to learn the equations and all that stuff. But then, for me, with math, I started to love math after I started to learn it, right? Well, it's the same thing with words of affirmation for yourself. It's the same thing with your thoughts and your feelings. If you wake up every day and then you say out loud, I'm in a shitty mood, my life sucks, then your life is going to suck. But if you wake up and you feel that inkling inside of you to feel that way, to feel gross, to not overcome that which you've been through, right? Then you're going to be stuck. But then if you're like, I'm going to fight this urge, and I'm just going to try this. I'm going to change my thoughts. Well, in order to change my thoughts, I need to input positive things, positive books, podcasts, things like this, watching videos to help you take that next step, right? Well, when you start doing that repetitively, then it starts to become a habit. And then your habits start to become really who you are. So it takes a time, it takes a process. So that's another thing when I coach with people, I say, are you willing to put in the time in order to overcome your obstacles. Because you have to be willing to put in the time. Because say you put in a year of your life now, so the next 40 years of your life will be amazing. Isn't that worth it? So you have to apply that. You have to, learn it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For you personally, I hear you went to church and you heard a lot of positive affirmations and inspirations and the Word of God. And you also started hanging out with people that were positive. What other tools? I'm sure there's many, but if you could just give us
Therapy.
a few. Okay.
Therapy was a huge one. So I'm not talking about medical therapy where you go and you're medicated. I'm talking about therapy where you go and speak. And therapy, psychotherapy, is beneficial because your therapist cannot say anything to anybody else. So it's private. And oftentimes people don't want to speak up about what's happened to them for fear of judgment, right? For fear of character annihilation. But when they go and talk to a therapist, when they're able to get out what it is that they've gone through without the other person judging them, saying anything in return, victim blaming, then it's a lot easier to accept it.
So just being able to have a non-judgmental, totally accepting listening ear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Anything else that helped change your thoughts, your feelings, your words? Personally.
A lot of outdoor activities. So for me, I connect with nature. One of my favorite things to do is to scuba dive. I love scuba diving. I love going and eating dinners by myself and drinking wine and quieting my mind. A lot of other people use meditation. That's a huge one. I'm not an expert in meditation by any means. It's hard for me to quiet my mind, but I'm very, very open to different types of meditation. Yoga, exercise, not staying in your house, under your covers, in your bed, being depressed. That's probably the most important thing, is getting your butt out of bed and going to do something.
And sometimes for a lot of us, that's the hardest part.
Sometimes it is.
Just getting out of bed.
Yeah.
Once you're out there, it becomes easier. But just that initial phase of like moving the 100-pound covers and getting up.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It is the hardest part, especially if you are in that depression. Especially if say you've been in a relationship for 14 years where this is what you're used to. So when it's taken away from you, then it's very strange. It's uncomfortable. Change is not fun for a lot of people.
You mentioned that there's thoughts and then there's feelings, right? So when you acknowledged what happened and then you knew from your mind space that you did not deserve like your intrinsic worth is not connected to the things that happened. How did that translate into your feelings over time?
So I used to get triggered, right? If somebody would say something to me, one of my biggest triggers was when I would be driving down the road and have a male passenger in my car. Whomever that was, a friend of mine, whatever, I would always tense up, right? Because my thoughts and my feelings associated with that was that, all men were going to yell at me, curse me, and tell me how horrible of a driver I am and what an idiot I was. But that wasn't true, right? So in order for me to really feel that that wasn't true, I had to really believe that I was worthy, that I didn't deserve that I knew I was more than what Paul said I was. And that was when I started to translate from thoughts to feelings, is when I really understood that his words didn't define me, that what I went through didn't define who I was, that my circumstance wasn't me. So I learned to be able to drive with men in my car, right? And if they said something, I'd just say, shut up. But no, most likely they wouldn't say anything. That was a joke.
Yeah.
But Yeah, it took time though. It really did take time. And that's what people want, an overnight success. And with me, going through the process of healing probably took me 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
You know, I'm now to a point where I don't mind talking about most of the intimate details that happened. But before, the intimate details were scary.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for the longest time, I wouldn't even acknowledge that I was raped. I wouldn't. He didn't penetrate me with his penis, so I didn't think it was rape. Although he still penetrated me without my permission.
Mm.
So it took probably a good 1.5 years for me to even acknowledge that one.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah. You talk about triggers.
Yeah.
What is the benefit of being triggered?
Well, when you're triggered, then if you just don't react, right? Because a lot of people just react.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're triggered and you start to feel horrible things inside and you just want to like lash out on people, you're triggered for a reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the benefit of being triggered is then you realize, okay, I am triggered. Now let's see why.
Mm.
You know, uncovering the why. Now, there's no positive thing in being triggered. It's uncomfortable. It sucks. Makes you want to cry and scream, right? And for me, when I was triggered, I wanted to cry a lot. I wanted to be like, why? Why God? You know? But when I was triggered, then I started realizing, okay, well, I'm triggered for a reason.
Mm.
What is that reason? Where did this come from? Oh, it was that specific time when Paul sat in the car and told me what an idiot I was for parking too close to a pickup truck. It was that time where he made me cry right before we went into an important meeting with his friends. And then as soon as we went into the restaurant, I had to rush to the bathroom because I just cried and I wanted to hide myself.
Mm.
You know, it's that. It's, okay, why are you triggered when people jokingly tell you, oh, you're lazy? Because Paul used to tell me that all the time, that I was lazy. That what do you do all day? You do nothing.
Mm.
You know, I was triggered for those reasons, and I had to understand why. A few times of having men in my car, not just one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I was driving, like the first time I drove with a man, it was really scary. Second time, it got a little less and a little less and a little less each time, and then towards the end of me starting to feel more comfortable is when I started realizing, oh, I am triggered because of that incident. Huh, it's like a light bulb went off.
And then after that revelation, was it okay to have people in your car?
Yeah, it was much better.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, nothing went away immediately.
Mm.
You know, it's like an addiction. If you're an alcoholic, you go to AA, you decide to quit drinking. The urge doesn't always go away, so the triggers sometimes don't always go away, but you can subdue them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes, you decide to go have a drink,
right?
And then you're like, what am I doing? And you quit, right? It's the same thing. You know, it's like, oh, what am I doing? Okay, no, this is different. This is okay.
Yeah.
This is safe.
Yeah.
Right?
The reason I bring it up as like specifically the benefits, it's also a loaded question, but it's under the assumption that it's actually better to be triggered than to avoid it altogether.
Well, 100%. That's the whole part of accepting and realizing, right? Because if I subdue my emotions, if I wouldn't have spoke up, if I wouldn't have written the play, if I wouldn't have written the book, then I would have been stuck in my circumstance. And a lot of people are stuck in their circumstance because they deny what happened to them. They don't want to talk about it.
We talk about abuse being perpetuated, the idea of hurting people, and I'm wondering if there is a connection of like repressing it and then repeating it. It's almost like there's only two choices I hear. One is like you express it, or two, you repress it, but then you project it, you know?
Well, yeah, when you repress it, right, it causes you ailments, right? And that's the projection. So if you're having emotional ailments, then it comes out in, yelling at people, or being a bitch, or people viewing you as, a negative person, or whatever that is. So when you repress your emotions and your feelings and your experiences, then you project something that is not entirely truthful.
Yeah. Wow. That is such a revelation for people that are, dealing with abuse, like emotional, physical.
And the one thing that I definitely want to get out is
Yeah.
you can't blame other people either, right? So with me, it took a long time for me to understand that I can't blame Paul for what he did. I can't always say it's his fault. He did this to me. He made me this way. No. There are certain reasons why I allowed myself to get involved in a domestic violence relationship. It doesn't make me wrong. There's just specific reasons. Like, I so badly wanted a fairy tale. I loved the fact that he was courting me. I adored him. There were just amazing things about this man that I fell head over heels for. And then I started to ignore, repress, not acknowledge what he was doing to me. I started to accept that it was okay, and that I believed what he said to me. So later on, when I finally escaped, oh yeah, in the beginning I hated his guts. How could he do that to me, right? But I also allowed myself to stay for 4 years. So I'm not blaming myself, and you definitely don't want to hear this from other people, because that's victim blaming. But you have to acknowledge that, okay, it's not completely his fault for what I am experiencing now. Now, it was his fault for beating me up.
Yeah.
I didn't deserve that.
Yeah.
It was his fault for raping me and emotionally and psychologically abusing me. But what I'm going through now, the result of what happened to me, it is now up to me to fix that. I can't blame him for the reactions I'm having.
Wow.
So you gotta fix your reactions.
Wow.
And it took me a long time to figure that out.
Yeah, and I feel like that really is the final step, right? Is acceptance and responsibility for your part, the reaction piece of it, to stop the perpetuation of that. I almost feel like, like his mom passed the baton to him, he passed it on to you, and now you're taking this baton and you're like, I'm not.
I'm throwing away the baton.
Yeah.
As so many people need to do. You have to throw away that baton. Because you don't want to pass that down and down and down. No. But you also have to take responsibility for your own actions and reactions. So what happened to you doesn't define you. What happened to you sucks, right? But if it doesn't define you, then you have a choice on how you're going to react to it. So make the right choice to benefit you and the other people around you.
Yeah. And I hear that there is choice, whereas people don't see that there is a choice.
Yeah.
But you're saying that there is a choice because you chose something different, and for you that has made all the difference.
Yeah, there is a choice. I have used my experience to write a book, to write a play. I'm working on my second book, to coach people, to start a nonprofit organization. And I'm sure we'll talk about Unsilenced Voices. But my managers in Sierra Leone just a month ago sent me this video of people, our managers and some of the other established organizations and the heads of their organizations standing up in front of schools, in front of one particular school where there's 300 young girls, school children, listening to us talk about how being raped and abused, and women having their own voice and getting an education and having your own career and not depending on somebody else is good. And this video is these kids who are, yay, it's awesome.
Yeah. Wow.
That's why we do what we do. That's why you recover, so you can help people. There's 7 billion people on this planet, and there are so many things that you can take a stand for.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And wow. I hear that there's a lot of power in forgiving.
Yes.
And power in taking the responsibility of fixing the reaction of something very traumatic that happened in your past.
Yeah.
And I also hear that that there is a bridge between the mess that you've went through and turning that into the message for other people that are going through what you went through. So let's talk about that transition. You mentioned before this interview that you were already doing nonprofit work prior to starting your own nonprofit.
My first mission trip was when I was with Paul. And I went to Guatemala because I was going through a course with Landmark Education. Paul thought that there was something wrong with me. Our therapist suggested us going to Landmark. It was this whole thing. But it was very beneficial. Well, I ended up going to Guatemala and seeing poverty, seeing kids, and this was while I was involved in domestic violence, right? And Paul and I, at this stage, we were supposedly getting better. And it was eye-opening. It blew my mind, right? And then I came back to the States, and I was set to go to Kenya next. And that is right around the time when I found out Paul was having affairs on me. And when Paul was having affairs on me, I lost my mind. That was my breaking point in my domestic violence relationship. I was rolling around on the floor in the kitchen, crying my eyes out, drinking a lot of whiskey, and throwing up, and I was a mess for 2 weeks. And then I realized, okay, I'm going to Kenya. I'm going to use this time, and I'm going to go to Kenya. And when I went to Kenya, I saw firsthand a lot of the poverty that most people don't get to see. A lot of the way that people are treated, the way that human beings shouldn't ever have to live. And I knew from that moment on that I would do something in nonprofit work. I had no idea it was going to be me starting my own nonprofit. So, from there I found a nonprofit that I wanted to be a part of, and I became vice president for it. And this was right around the time where I finally left Paul, although we were still connected for that last year. So it was 3 years in a physically abusive relationship. And the 4th year, we barely ever saw each other, and it was more emotional and financial abuse. So when I moved back to LA, and I wanted to be a part of this nonprofit, and so I was VP for this nonprofit called Young Vision Africa, and I ended up going to Sierra Leone. And because of my experience in domestic violence, I then wanted to talk to some of the women. Now, we weren't there for domestic violence. We were there specifically to help school children get an education. Well, I put together a couple of different groups of women I spoke to. And one was older women in the community, and the other one were like more college-aged kids. And I understood how bad it is. I mean, it's bad here in the United States, but it's really bad internationally. And when I got back to the U.S. after that, I decided to focus my efforts on domestic violence, focus my efforts on abuse, ending abuse. So I resigned as VP for Young Vision Africa, and I started volunteering at the Downtown Women's Center on Skid Row 1 or 2 times a week. And I was there for 6 months. And I wanted to work there. I was really trying to get an actual job there. But I also had firsthand experience, and some of my superiors didn't like it that I would coach some of the women on the streets to do this or that, and there was a structure, and I'm not real good at sticking to a structure. So I didn't get hired, but I did gain a lot of experience, and I still have a great relationship with the Downtown Women's Center. Amazing, amazing organization. If any of your viewers want to help an organization, that's the one to help. And then I interviewed for a nonprofit that was based in Kenya called Art and Abolition, and they had their yearly meeting up in the San Francisco area. So I flew up to Oakland and I went to the meeting, and I'm spiritual, so I felt God's presence with the organization, but I didn't feel like I was supposed to be there. And the next day I walk around the streets of San Francisco going, okay God, what do you want me to do? And I sit down on Pier 39 and have clam chowder and a glass of wine, and he sent me a sign. A gentleman came up and we started talking, and I told him, parts of my story, and he said, you should start a nonprofit. And I said, well, that's not the first time I've heard that, so maybe this is the time I should listen. We're a 501c3 within a month. I was in Africa a month later.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. All right, so let's talk about Unsilenced Voices and how it started in terms of like the first year for you, and where like the evolution of that and where it is now.
So about 2 or 3 months, about 2 months, because that's about the time I went to Africa, after I had started the nonprofit, I had to figure out, okay, what are we actually going to be doing to help people? So I wanted to go overseas to find out what the communities wanted. Now I just had this heart for Sierra Leone and Kenya and Africa in general because I've been there, right? So I wanted to do something.
Yeah.
Well, I ended up meeting this Ghanaian doctor. His name is Dr. Bennett Annan. He lives in the U.S. and we started talking, and he said, I'm Ghanaian and my family's in Ghana. Why don't you stay with my family and go to Ghana? Packed up my stuff and went to Ghana. And I literally was there just learning. I wanted to experience the community. I wanted to talk about domestic violence. I wanted to get people to open up about a taboo subject. In order for me to get them to open up, I then had to retell my story over and over and over again. But I was used to that because I had done it already with my play and then my book, so I started to get a lot of these women to tell me what was happening. We've been working with the ARC Foundation, and we wanted to help them raise funds so they could reopen a shelter, a temporary shelter for survivors of domestic violence, because there were 0 at the time, and they ended up shutting down in 2012 because of lack of funding. So we decided that, okay, we want to do that. Well, 6 months later, I went back to Ghana, but then I also went to Sierra Leone. So I was fulfilling, some of the obligations and shaking more hands. But when I went to Sierra Leone, I had already developed relationships with people. So then the managers introduced me to, the Family Support Unit, Commit and Act Foundation, the Bow Women's Vocational Center, and we were able to then rescue girls who were selling themselves as sex workers on the street, go through vocational training instead of selling themselves, so we sponsor girls to do that. And we also do sensitization programs, and this was the beginning of our educational summits and seminars. So in Sierra Leone, we do monthly community sensitization meetings. We were doing 2, now we're only doing 1 because now we're going to schools. So we're doing them in schools as well. So we're impacting anywhere from 80 to 150 community members per sensitization meeting. Plus we're impacting anywhere from 300 to 400 students at each one of the sensitization meetings as well. And that's just a ripple effect. The government of Sierra Leone has now recognized Unsilenced Voices as a huge advocate against domestic violence and sexual abuse. That's a huge one, sexual abuse in African countries. So we have their support, which is absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And now we're doing the same thing in Ghana. The ARC Foundation came to me and said, maybe we should, we need funding to do school sensitization meetings. and I am 100% for that.
Yeah.
So we are now funding school sensitization meetings in Ghana, where we're seeing anywhere from 500 to 700 students that are being affected, if not more, by each one. So we're doing 12 school sensitizations in Sierra Leone per year, and we're doing 17 in Ghana per year. So it's pretty awesome. And then now we have 6 partners between those 2 countries. We are a fiscal sponsor for an organization in Nepal where they're called Happy Children, and they rescue children who have been sold to lords from a lower caste, who were beaten, used as child brides, who run away from them, but they have to buy them back at like 500 euros per head. So we're just a fiscal sponsor for them now, meaning that if you want to donate to Happy Children, then we will send them the money, since they are actually in Germany. They're not a US-based organization. And then here in the US, now we're expanding. So what's happening here is awesome. I'm really excited. We are partnering with Beyond Freedom International, which is an organization in Orange County to combat sex trafficking. And the CEO of the organization, Janelle Gordon, is a survivor of sex trafficking herself. She was trafficked for 10 years up and down the 405 freeway. So when we started coming here and we want to do things, we're not funded yet to actually do our sensitization meetings, but once that happens, what we're planning on doing is having quarterly educational summits where we're going to provide pro bono legal assistance to survivors. Mark Goldberg is one of our attorneys who is helping us get other attorneys on board. We're going to provide resources for counseling services. So we've partnered with a woman named Annalisa, who runs an organization called Lasting Impressions, and they help survivors through dance therapy, through movement, more theatrical type therapy, to help them overcome that which they've gone through. And we are also in pre-collaboration, so we're just talking right now to the Child Liberation Foundation. And they're an amazing organization that travels all over the world, and they rescue children through their other nonprofit called Underground Operation Railroad, where they go into countries and rescue young kids who are being trafficked. Tony Robbins supports this organization. It's ran by Brad Damon. Tim Ballard is a huge part of it. So they are really awesome. And then we also want to provide other resources like housing assistance, child care assistance, being able to integrate back into the workforce and society. But in order to do all of that, it requires funding. So that's what we're looking for right now, is the funding to be able to do that. But we're shaking the right hands and partnering with the right organizations to get some stuff done.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's
pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty awesome. And for only being around for 2 years, I think we're making great strides.
Yeah.
There's so much more to do. So much more to do.
Of course.
And we can't do it alone. We are now to the point where we need supporters. We need high-influenced supporters as well. People who are in the media often, people who have large social media followings. We need influence and we need funding.
Yeah. Could you explain or could you elaborate on the sensitization?
Yeah, so sensitization meetings are just educational seminars. So it's like going to school. An assembly in school, and they talk about a specific subject.
Okay.
It's just called sensitization meetings, and I guess I continue using that word because our team in Africa uses those words, but it's just educational summits.
What? How do you bring in such a sensitive topic like domestic violence, like sexual abuse, and present it in an educational setting?
You bring in people who have overcome it. You bring in people who have experienced it, right? There are not a lot of organizations led by survivors. That's what makes Unsilenced Voices different. That's what makes Beyond Freedom International different. Because we are led by survivors. We know what a lot of these victims are feeling
Mm-hmm.
You know, helpless. They don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So that's how.
Could you tell us the distinction between a victim and a survivor?
So a victim is you're still trapped, right? You're still in that cycle. And a
Like I
survivor-
deserve it, like that?
No, like you're still with your abuser.
Oh, mm-hmm.
Yeah, and a survivor, you're starting to break out from, I don't deserve it, but did I deserve it? Wait, I need help, right? You're a survivor. I'm a survivor. I still need help every now and then too. I'm not perfect. Nobody's perfect, right? But we do the best we can.
Yeah.
So if you're a victim, that means you're still involved in sex trafficking, abuse of any kind. If you're a survivor, you've escaped it somehow, but you need further assistance.
Yeah. Yeah. How often do you see survivors go back to what they were used to, and what do you think could be implemented to prevent that?
So I went back to my abuser over 7 times. Right, and a lot of people leave their abusers multiple times before finally escaping. In order to finally break free, there has to be a breaking point. And that breaking point could be anything from infidelity to a severe beating, to something that your abuser has done to your children, to, I mean, you name it, it could be anything, right? But that breaking point will then propel you to take action. If you're not ready to leave, you're not going to leave. Well, according to my friend, her sister said, well, you know, I think he's going to change. I'm going to open back my doors for him. You know, I love him. But until you reach that breaking point, which really like triggers a huge change in you,
Yeah.
most people will stay and go back.
Wow. Let's talk about the word love.
Okay.
Since this organization is called the Love Story, you know, obviously there is love. I don't want to dismiss the fact that what you and Paul had has love in it, right? Because there's obviously moments where there's genuine connection, and there's genuine like standing for each other's possibilities, the higher version of each other, right? First, what is I mean, this might be hard to do, but like if you could take just like the maybe 16-year-old version of yourself and bring in the definition of what you think love is, what would Michelle's 16-year-old version say about love?
So I was in a relationship when I was 16. Now, when I was 16, I was kind of a hellion, just letting you know. I was a partier. I was rebellious. I did well in school, but it was just... I had fun in my teenage years, but I was in a relationship. Now, I don't remember the name I gave my my high school sweetheart in my book, but I'm just gonna... I'll call him Robert right now, okay? So I was in a relationship with him, and he was awesome, and I thought I was going to marry him. You know, and I thought that that was my end-all love. That was my fairy tale romance, was him. You know, blue-eyed, dark hair, he was amazing. Love doesn't mean that everything's perfect, though, right? And you can have multiple loves in your life, and I have. You know, I loved him dearly at the time, and I loved Paul. But true love, right, really means that you support each other, you love each other, you don't hit below the belt. Oftentimes people hit below the belt in fights and arguments. There's no physical violence or sexual violence. You watch your words, you acknowledge what the other person is doing. Respect is a huge issue. Respect is a huge quality that needs to be attained in a romantic relationship. But my 16-year-old self, I thought that I was fine. So when you're asking me, to put myself in my 16-year-old shoes, I thought I was going to marry Robert. I really did truly love him. And we were on the same page, but we were young. We were so young. And eventually we, went different ways. But I'm still friends with him to this day. And, we were together for 6.5 years, which is a long time. But looking back, that was true love. That was, my first love.
Yeah.
But what needs to happen now, who I'm looking for now is somebody with the qualities that I just said, respect and admiration and, controlling your words and your temper and, words of affirmation are huge. My love language is quality time and physical touch. So physical touch doesn't always mean sex. It means being able to hold hands and cuddle and, kiss, but also not getting in the way of each other. I'm a very, very busy woman. And some of the men that I've dated lately want me to be at their beck and call. And I'm like, that's not going to happen. Because I'm really busy and I'm on a mission.
Yeah.
And nobody's going to change my mission. So if you're not going to jump on board this train, then we're not going to work out. And it doesn't mean that they have to, do what I'm doing. They can do their own thing.
Yeah.
But they have to support, right?
Yeah. I hear that love is honoring each other's calling and respect. Let's talk about respect, because I was actually looking on the Unsilenced Voices on the epidemic portion of it and looking at the contrast of when it's out of when respect isn't there. So one of the descriptions in there is it's not often physical abuse, it's sometimes emotional. Most of the time it's probably emotional. And you also mentioned on the website that emotional abuse sometimes outlasts the effects of a physical abuse.
Yeah, emotional abuse has longer lasting implications than physical violence. So growing up you hear sticks and stones will break your bones, but names will never hurt you. That is so wrong. Because words, names that you heard when you were a child, you still think about to this day. Susie Q called me this, so I'm going to identify with what Susie Q called me for the rest of my life. Right? We see that.
Yeah.
If you were beat up, and bullied when you were younger, and, what is that, where they put you in the toilet and throw you in garbage cans and things like that. Yeah, that sucks, right? But it's the words that they said while they were doing it that you remember, not the actual physical violence. It's the same thing in domestic violence and abuse. It's the degradation. It's the horrible language. It's, words. Words really hurt you. And the emotional abuse that you experienced is really what causes you to stay because you believe it.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like it's more of the insidious one, because that's the one where you can't just go up to, let's say, the cops and say, oh, this person called me names. Well, what are they going to do? Because they have 10 other cases that they have to address that's physical and more immediate. So it's not like you can go and seek, reparations for that. And then it's also the kind that creeps in over time, you didn't realize the effects of it till maybe later down the line, and it's still kind of trapped in your mind.
Yep.
There's something else in the description of that. It's when people use emotional abuse, it's about control. Why do you think people seek to control and using emotional abuse as a source of control?
Well, I think that narcissistic abusers subconsciously use it. I don't think that they use it on a conscious level. Because it's a pattern that you see, right, in all narcissistic abusers, that they try to control you, right? Isolation is one of the very first steps in controlling you, meaning that, oh, quit your job, I'll take care of you, come move in with me. So you're not close to your family, you're not close to your friends, you don't have colleagues, so you're alone, right? So then you move up, like I moved with Paul, and I'm isolated and alone. So all I have to rely on is him. So then all you hear is him. So then the words coming out of his mouth, you believe, you think are true. You think that it's your fault. You start to, believe his lies. You start to second guess. So gaslighting is a huge thing. Narcissistic abusers will tend to make you think that the way you remember a situation is wrong. But the way I remember it, this is what really happened. So there's a lot of red flags to look for in abusive relationships. Wanting to move the relationship too quickly, too fast. That's a huge red flag. The way that your partner speaks to the people around them, being your mailman, being your server or bartender, whatever that looks like, how they speak to them. If they're almighty and powerful and think that they're, better than shit in a handbag. It's you watch that, and also watch their association. How do their friends talk about them? How do they talk to their friends? How do they talk about the other people around them? How is their family life? Make sure that they don't want to, completely control situations. When you go out to dinner and you're used to having a voice about what you choose to order, make sure you choose to order it. Don't allow them to take advantage of you. Don't allow them to order for you. Don't allow them to tell you what to do. Stand on your own 2 feet.
Yeah.
But all of these red flags are, they're traps.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely hear that someone that wants to control is someone that wants to weaken the other person, to make them completely reliant on the person that's doing the abusing.
Well, if you're completely reliant on your abuser, then you feel like you have no choices. You don't have resources, you don't have an income, you don't have a car.
Yeah. So it's almost like they first hook you with this idea that I could take care of you, but then they'll break your legs to make sure you don't run away when you're at that position where you're completely reliant on them.
100%. So empathy is arguably the #1 trait that you need for the 21st century. And the reason being, so I have a good friend, his name is George Chanos. He is probably the most intelligent person that I know. He travels, he used to be the Attorney General for Nevada. He is extremely intelligent, and he just wrote a book called Millennial Samurai. And he talks a lot about what's happening in the 21st century. Now this is a completely different subject, but we're going to come back to empathy. Where, AI and global warming and all of the destruction that we're seeing in politics and the way we're treating people all over the world, right? In order to survive in what is to come, you have to be empathetic. So you have to be able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes so you know what they're going through, and vice versa. Being empathetic is a huge trait that people should have. It's a quality in people. Well, being too empathetic, yes, could cause you to get in abusive relationships, right? But empathy is not a bad thing. You just need to know how to use it. So I'm still learning that trait. I'm learning that I can still be empathetic towards somebody, but I don't have to be with them. So even my latest guys that I'm dating, right? They all have their own types of problems. Yet nobody's perfect, right? But I need to start realizing how many problems are really healthy for me to get involved with. Right? So that's what I'm learning now. I'm not a relationship coach, right? Because I'm not in a relationship right now. But I do know what looks bad and what is good.
Yeah.
So I'm looking for that good right now. And you have to be empathetic towards somebody, but you also just don't have to put up with their shit either.
Yeah.
Right?
It is a very
fine line.
Fine line. Yeah, you could get lost in a lot of empathy for someone and almost lose yourself in that empathy. And I think a lot of empaths come up with the same problem of like, how do you show compassion without losing yourself in the hell that you're having compassion for.
Yeah. Boundaries. Right?
Yeah.
Boundaries is a huge, huge skill set. And you have to be able to put boundaries down.
Yeah.
And there's a book called Boundaries that you should read.
Okay.
It's a great, great book. And boundaries are very, very important, because if you don't have any boundaries, then people will constantly cross them.
Yeah.
Constantly.
It's almost like people could sniff out people that don't have boundaries.
Yeah, almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because, you know, I'm very fascinated by the narcissist slash empath dynamic, because I see it a lot in different relationships, personal and outside.
And it creates codependency.
Right.
That's what that does. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's always it's like a magnetic dynamic.
Yep.
Of the narcissist empath. Like narcissists look for empaths to fill their narcissist supply, and empaths
Always want to help.
always want to help,
Right.
but then they look for the most difficult, challenging
Yes.
person to help as a way of, I guess, I don't know, like, you know, wanting a challenge, if you will.
Yeah, I might phrase it a little differently.
Yeah.
Empaths, we want to help, so we subconsciously seek out the worst people to go for. This is also a reason why I started a nonprofit, right? Because it's hard running a nonprofit.
Yeah.
And the people that we're serving have gone through horrible, horrible things. Horrible things. So being an empath, I think I can help them. I can make a change in their lives. And that's what you think in a relationship in general. I can be that person. One thing that empaths, there we go, need to learn is that you don't have to be that one person to be the end-all, fix-all. They have to take responsibility for their own actions, and they have to take that next step to change their lives. Taking responsibility for what you're doing. And a lot of addicts won't take responsibility for their actions.
Yeah.
You know, they just want the next high. They're also not in the right state of mind.
Yeah, I hear a link, honestly, between what we first discussed in this interview, which is denial. I feel like addiction is just perpetuating the denial of the trauma.
Yeah.
So I feel like, you know, going back to your initial relationship with Paul, was there anything addictive involved in the dynamic?
Alcohol. Lots
Okay.
and lots of alcohol. So you're talking specifically a substance that is addicting. But yeah, there was a lot of alcohol. He was an addict, in denial that he was an alcoholic, right? I was in denial at the time that I was using alcohol to cover up my pain. But he himself was addicted. So we were very codependent, is what I mean by that. Because I was addicted to Paul. I was addicted to his mannerisms, the way he spoke, how he acted, all of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a substance involved as well.
Yeah.
But he wasn't always drunk when he emotionally abused me. He was, however, always drunk when he physically assaulted me.
Oh yeah, that brings to mind something you said the first time I met you. And this is something I could personally relate to, because I was also in a relationship once upon a time ago where the man's eyes blacked out. Like there was no light in his pupils, and then it was a different person. So in your account of, you know, the violence that happened, but what, you know, how alcohol was involved and how that whole setups, you know, created this horrific event. What do you think is I'm trying to frame the question. What do you think is the source of people's violent behavior?
Oh, the source of people's violent behavior is not substance. That just accentuates it.
Ah.
Right? The source is denial of what they've gone through. Right? It is that hurt people. But what substances do, two things. It will numb the pain, and second, it will allow your body and your mind to not have conscious inhibitors. So consciously, we don't lash out, right, on people. If you're a healthy human being, right? You don't just automatically say, you pissed me off, I'm going to go beat you up. That doesn't naturally happen. When you add substances, then those inhibitors start to go away. And then you feel like you can do whatever you want. And for example, with alcohol, you drink too much alcohol, you think you are king shit. You know, we've all been there. We've all drank too much one night. We've all been dancing on tabletops and bars and having a good old time. And then you look back on the footage the next day and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that.
Yeah.
It's the same thing though. It's, you know, that's within us. We like to go out and have a good time. You know, I love to dance. But do I really like to dance that naughty, that much? You know, it's like, no, I don't.
Yeah.
But because I was drunk, I allowed myself to do that.
So it's almost like an addiction of a substance takes away those boundaries that might have been healthy for someone.
Yeah, it either takes away those boundaries or it numbs the pain. You can find me on all social media handles at Michelle Jewsbury. You can also find Unsilenced Voices on all social media handles. On Twitter and on Facebook, drop the D. So it's Unsilenced Voices. And then you can also go to unsilencedvoices.org, and you can go to michellejewsbury.com. And also unsilenceyourvoice.com is where you can find information about my 10-week webinar series, Overcoming Obstacles, and also the 6-week intensive deep dive into steps to overcoming obstacles and trauma. We also have an event coming up on May 30th called Core Transformation, where some amazing speakers are going to be coming and sharing their stories. A lot of it is business and personal development, so make sure to watch out for links regarding Core Transformation, but they will be out on coretransformation.net here pretty soon.
Don't allow them to distract you. Don't allow them to tell you